Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Tim Powers. Today, we're going to discuss his writing career and hopefully try to steal some tips and tricks from him along the way. So, Tim, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
So, how did you get into this crazy career called writing, at which it's virtually impossible to make money nowadays?
I think at about age 7 or 6, younger probably, I read a book called Timothy Turtle, kid's book about a turtle who gets turned on his back and his woodland friends have to get him right side up again. Wasn't a great book, but it impressed me with the idea of, look, a story is told here. And it must have been younger than that because subsequently our mother read us the Narnia books and The Hobbit. And
speaking of which, when you say Narnia, I think C.S. Lewis, and then I immediately think of the Screw Tape Letters, which are amazing. But anyway, let's just go back to. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
His nonfiction is great too. Yeah. But when I was 9, my mother at a church book sale got me a copy of Heinlein's Red Planet. And I read that and it fixed all my dials in one position towards science fiction. And so I, for probably 10 years, read nothing but science fiction and fantasy. In those days, it was possible to have read it all. You know, A. Merritt, Kuttner, Heinlein, Lovecraft, Frederick Pohl, everybody, Asimov. And in 1967, F&SF magazine ran an editorial on how to submit a story. So I immediately did. I immediately had a story which was a retelling of a story in that same issue. And it was, of course, rejected, but I was very pleased to have an actual rejection slip. I've still got it.
I have many.
Yeah. I thought Hemingway got these. You know, this is real. And so I kept for years writing short stories and sending them out and getting them rejected. And then in probably 1973, a friend of ours, K.W. Jeter, had sold a couple of books to a new publisher called Laser Books, which was a division of all things of Harlequin romances up in Canada. They decided to see if science fiction would sell as well as romances did. And so for a couple of years, they hired Roger Elwood to select books and Kelly Freas to do the cover paintings, which was a brilliant move. Freas being about the best science fiction artist there was. And eventually they decided that science fiction did not sell as well as romances, and they dropped the line. But before they dropped it, I managed to sell 2 books to them. And that committed me. They weren't the greatest publisher. They would rewrite your story and then ignore your proof corrections. And every book had to be exactly 192 pages so that the right number would fit in a shipping carton. But they were 2 books. I was published. You know, the books were in bookstores. And so
And what were those 2 books?
The first one was called Before I Knew You Should Have Titles That People Could Pronounce. The Skies Discrowned. Skies, plural. And the second one was called An Epitaph in Rust. And they were both pretty short, I think 55,000 words. But as I say, they committed me. And when I sold the first one, I dropped out of college. I had vague plans of going for a master's degree, which I abandoned. And so when Laser Books folded, I didn't go back to college. I did have to get my job back at a pizza parlor, but I kept sending books out and eventually sold one to Lester Del Rey, who was really a terrific editor. I sent him a 55,000 word novel about King Arthur being reincarnated at the siege of Vienna in 1529. And he said, double the length, eliminate the dead year in the middle of it, don't have the guy die at the end, and about 6 other things. He said, if you do all that, I might buy it. I'm not saying I will, but I might. And I had no other action going, so I did
Right.
as he said, which enormously improved the book. And it got published, and then he rejected 3 or 4 books of mine afterward. But he would always, when he rejected a book like the book following that was one of mine called The Anubis Gates. And he said, no, I don't want it. It stinks. I said,
But you sold that one. You absolutely published that one.
oh, well, not with Del Rey. And he said, I want my advance money back. And I said, I spent it. He said, well, then you owe me another book. So I wrote one called Dinner at Deviant's Palace. And he said, geez, this is worse yet. You still owe me a book, Powers. Okay. So I wrote one called On Stranger Tides about pirates. He said, this stinks too. But by that time,
Didn't they make a movie based on that with the Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah. By that time, I had been selling them to Ace Books, these rejects, and I had enough money to be able to pay him back that long-standing
So he
debt.
never bought anything from you after that? That you could...
Right. But every time he rejected a book, like Anubis Gates, he didn't just say, shove it. He gave me a 4 or 5 page single-spaced letter saying what was wrong with it. And in each case, with each of these rejected books, I looked at his letter and thought, yeah, you're right. These are good points. I got to do. These are obvious improvements. And so I'd say to him, Lester, I'm going to rewrite the book according to your suggestions and points here. When I do you want to see it again? And say, no, I hate it. I don't want to see it again. But those are the things that are wrong with it. And so in a way, even though he never bought another book from me after the one called Drawing of the Dark, in a way, he was still my editor for 3 subsequent books and a very valuable editor. But yeah, he didn't want to buy any of them. So I wound up going with Ace Books for several years and then subsequent publishers afterward. And I just a week ago finished my 18th book, which will be coming out from Baen in August, apparently, of next year. In fact, I'm still doing some rewrites, correcting some stuff, but it is done. It is scheduled.
So what is it about? Like, you might as well promote it.
It's about the Bronte sisters, Emily and Charlotte, and authors of Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre and Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Because when I was reading, just idly for entertainment, reading biographies of them, I noted that both Emily and her idiot brother Branwell were both bitten by a mad dog several years apart, but there were no ill effects from them, even though it was pretty verifiably mad dogs. And it occurred to me, even though it was 10 years apart, what if it was the same dog? And what if it wasn't really precisely entirely a dog? And so I thought, okay, maybe this reading is not entertainment. Maybe this is research. Keep reading about these people. And so I read a whole lot about the Bronte sisters and their father and their weird ancestry and so forth. And it became a story about werewolves.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Not my fault. That's what the research said.
And when you say that's what the research said, what did you learn during the research process?
Well, there were weird elements in their family history. If you recall Wuthering Heights, the hero and or bad guy Heathcliff was found as a gypsy-looking, Welsh-looking orphan, and well-to-do Yorkshireman finds him and brings him home, and he turns out to be a devil incarnate. Terrible, terrible guy. This was based on an actual person in the Brontes' lineage, and there always, if you read almost any biography looking for clues to weird occult backstory, if you've got the right kind of paranoid squint, you will find things. And so looking at it as kind of a cold case occult detective, I thought, well, duh, werewolves are involved. I can't help it. And so it turns out to be a big story about a plague of lycanthropy in Yorkshire, and the Bronte sisters wind up involved in it, and all kinds of terrible things happen. I'm always very careful in writing historical stuff never to violate recorded history.
Interesting.
If history says this person was here, I can't allow myself to say, well, no, actually he was over here. And I can't change dates in the calendar. It's like the real established immovable history is ink notations in a calendar, and I can only work in pencil.
So you write it as if this really happened. So there's no causality violations.
It's not alternate. I always hate if somebody says, in this alternate history, powers, I think, no, it's not alternate. It's this here world. Show me where I deviate from history. Nowhere.
Interesting. Yeah. So that almost brings out your creativity more than if you give yourself the latitude to change things.
That's
it forces you to.
At it. I almost thought it was useful for somebody with no intrinsic imagination, since I don't have to make up things. I just have to connect the dots. I said,
you have to do it in a way that's plausibly deniable. Like you can't.
Yes. And
that's where it's hard.
And the lines that connect the dots have to be supernatural conflict, not just the mailman was sick that day.
And then what's the title of that book, and when does it come out?
The title is My Brother's Keeper, and it comes out in August of next year. So far scheduled.
People should definitely check that out. And then there was a series before that where I think you alluded to in a prior interview that we did about your series about UFOs.
Yeah, it was taking place in right now, here and now, Los Angeles, because I've always found Los Angeles endlessly rich gold mine of weird color. I mean, so much stuff you don't have to make up. It's already there. Maybe you got to dig a little and trespass on property here and there, check to see if certain doors are locked or not. But LA is just a sort of crazy wonderland. But I did have a sort of occult stuff going on kind of under the surface. You might fly to LAX and drive to your airport and attend a conference and then go home again, and you wouldn't have noticed. But if you live here for a while, my thesis is, you will notice that there's kind of a secret Los Angeles bubbling away, not quite prominently enough to make the newspapers. And just east of Los Angeles in the Mojave Desert is this giant boulder. It's about 7 stories tall. I think it's the biggest freestanding boulder in the world. And it's called, evocatively, Giant Rock. If you go to Google Maps and put in Giant Rock, it'll take you there. And in the 1950s, it was the focus of flying saucer enthusiasts. There was the story that a flying saucer had landed there, had interactions with a guy who lived there, and every reason to believe that they would be back before long. And so every year people would gather on some date around this enormous rock in the middle of the damn desert and have parties and barbecues, always watching for the flying saucers to come back.
This isn't some derivation of Burning Man, is it?
No, but in fact, I think it was a different public. The flying saucer enthusiasts seemed to be sort of middle-aged, middle class. They go out there in their RVs, but they have this one unifying interest, which is men from outer space. Even in those pre-internet days, they had sort of underground newspapers, correspondence circles, Fate magazine, and there was kind of a subculture based on the flying saucers. And so I read up on what currently is the status of the government's attitude toward anomalous aerial phenomena, and grafted that to the eccentric subculture of flying saucer enthusiasts. And there always comes a point when I'm writing something speculative, admittedly crazy speculative, when late at night I find some extra bit of research that appears to confirm my crazy fictional idea. And then I think, oh my God, Powers, you're not making this up. You have stumbled onto the real explanation.
In some cases, you actually might have, but
well, then it's a weird world.
It's definitely a weird world.
And I always imagine that the government has been monitoring my research, is aware that I've stumbled on this, and that right now there's an NSA assassin in the yard lining up my head in the crosshairs of a rifle. And then I go to bed and I'm okay in the morning. But yeah, the whole flying saucer UFO cluster of information with fairly reliable facts on one end and crazy folklore at the other end was a beautiful sort of structure to hang a story on.
Well, and that's what's beautiful about it, because some of this stuff is deliberate government disinformation to hide whatever the stealth bomber program or whatever.
Well, sure, all the snake works, skunk works. In fact, it was fascinating to deeply research Area 51. What is the name of the woman that wrote the big book on Area 51? I don't recall. But if you Google or Amazon for Area 51, I'm sure her book shows up. And it gave really exhaustive history of the place. And of course, mostly it was experimental aircraft.
Right.
But I was able to sneak in a couple of UFO appearances too.
If you really want to go down a rabbit hole,
it's too late. The book's done.
Well, it's just for pure interest, because it sounds like you're interested in this stuff. There's been a group of remote viewers who are, not the military type, but they're people who have been trained by the military folks. In fact, I just interviewed him, a guy named D.A.Z. Smith. You're supposed to get these targets in a double blind or single blind. So you just get 8 digits, and that's it. It's random. They don't really correspond to anything except the target.
Yeah.
And he was given Area 51 as one of these targets. So I think it might be on remote viewed. He just goes and draws what he's seeing. And it is, I don't know if it's true. I don't know. You have to take remote viewing with a grain of salt, because sometimes you have analytical overlays. Sometimes your imagination can intrude. But it is fascinating regardless.
Oh, yeah.
He goes through and views what he sees. He starts talking about an underground structure. And I won't spoil it for you or for my audience, but definitely check it out.
Of course, remote viewers should go look at Area 51. In fact, I remember flying over it virtually with Google Maps.
Oh, it's probably rubbed out, right?
No, you can see stuff. It's probably all made up, but you can see stuff. Yeah. And your little pointer, when it moves over Area 51, it turns into a little flying saucer, which is very cool.
I can see some nerd at Google doing something like that. Which, did you use Google Maps or did you use Google Earth?
Lately, Maps.
Okay, you know who designed Google Earth, right?
Tell me.
It's the CIA's.
Well, that makes sense, because it's a superhuman effort when you consider the scope and detail of Google Earth, you think it's comparable to like the Colossus at Rhodes. I mean, this is an incredible thing to exist. I love that I can go, it almost feels like cheating. I can go anywhere, circle the neighborhood, or drop the little orange man into the street and get 360 ground level view. There was one place in the Mojave Desert I wanted to go look at, a place called Amboy, which is kind of a ghost town. It's on Route 66, and when Route 66 stopped being Route 66, Amboy just died. But there are a lot of weird stories about devil worship and human sacrifice and whatnot in this abandoned middle of nowhere 1950s truck stop type place. And I told my wife, at first I said we should go look at it. And she said, no, are you crazy? We're not going there. Come on. So I said, well, I'll go there with Google Earth and I'll drop the little orange man in the street so I can look around. And she said, probably a whole bunch of other orange men will come out and kill him. I found that for research, which I do a lot of, Google Earth, Google Maps, and YouTube are priceless. You got your character stuck on a ledge halfway up, the Eiger. I'm not going to go there, but many people did and videoed it. I want to have a scene at the bow of a square rigger ship in a typhoon. Somebody did it. They videoed it. You can go watch. You get everything except the smells.
Yeah. So you keep mentioning the Mojave Desert. So I lived there for 5 years. I was at the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California. And the only issue is I was never looking for any of this stuff when I was there, which is disappointing because I should have absolutely been looking up at the sky and all this good stuff. But the one thing that strikes you about it, though, is the first time you run out of fuel and water and you're not in a car, you're in a tank, and when you're operating with tanks, there's people out there, but they're not anywhere near. And It happens in August, it's 120 degrees. And you have to make that decision. Should somebody go out and try to contact somebody? The radio's not working, or do we just wait? And there's stories out there that people who get lost in the desert, they'll find bloated bodies that just There's it's no joke. It's for real out there.
Oh yeah. I'll do it with you two. I don't want to go there. We went to Giant Rock, admittedly, but it's not too far into the desert. But yeah, there's remnants of crashes of the giant wings. Do you remember those aircraft that were just wings?
Yeah, flying wings. Yeah. I don't think what they're called.
Remotely, there are crash sites of those things. If they're within 5 miles of a highway, people have looted them. But yeah, and you fly over in an airplane and look out and you see these horizon-wide roads, dirt roads, and a little cluster of buildings. You think, what the hell is that? Who goes there? So yeah, the Mojave Desert, like Los Angeles, does all on its own seem to conjure up all kinds of mysteries.
Well, to your point, we used to have a terrain feature, and you could look it up, called Crash Hill. And it's where an A-10 crashed, I believe, during training. And there's a lot of people who would die out there. There's somebody who bizarrely went to my high school before me, well, all the way back in Delaware, but he was leading a Bradley platoon. And there's a terrain feature called Black Basalt, where they were on a night mission, just training, where the first Bradley just went right over the horizon and dropped. And the entire platoon, all 6 of them, and they died. But yeah, there's a lot of crazy. There's nothing out there. Nothing.
Yeah, that's what I look for when I'm considering writing a book. I'll think, I want to find a situation, a place, a time that looks likely to have lots of interesting mysteries about it. And then I'll start researching, looking for things that are too cool not to use. And if I've picked a good situation, there'll be a lot of things that are too cool not to use.
Well, here's something for you. This one's free. Are you familiar with the 411 series of books?
No.
Okay, so I'll get to the point really quickly, but you can go into a real rabbit hole in this. But there are certain disappearances that once you solve for animal attacks, human abductions, just normal things, there's a cluster, particularly at Yosemite, because I know you write a lot about California, and I got to ask you a question about that. There are clusters in national parks where once you rule out all of those cases, they just don't make any sense. So they typically happen near granite fields, near water. When some people are lost, one of their colleagues would see them, and then a second later, they'd be gone. They would bring in people, like huge numbers of people, to search. And they typically discover these people in areas that have been covered over and over and over again. They would just find the body several days later. One thing that they never check, but the guy who really focuses on this, his name is David Paulides, always wants to know what's in their stomachs.
Oh.
Right? Because if they were gone for 4 days,
right,
why did it appear that they just ate? Like stuff, I don't know if that's what he's seen, but other bizarre correlations is it's typically they're either highly intelligent people, like fit, or have some sort of disability, or they've been old. And by disability, I mean they might have lost an eye. Oftentimes they tend to be experienced hunters. So they're not people who generally just get lost in the wilderness. And then bizarrely, a lot of people of German descent. Again, I'm not coming up with an explanation as to why. And then when David Paulides would ask these people, hey, can I just have a list of all the people who would disappear? The national park is like, we'll give it to you for $1 million. Right? It's the U.S. government. Like, what? Why would you have to charge them? And I bet if you said, here's $1 million, they would say, okay, actually, it's $2 million.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's all sorts of theories about what this is, but it's one of those mysteries that. So just look.
That's the sort of thing.
Look into it.
Yeah,
and he has a YouTube channel, by the way, too, which is
yeah. I look for that sort of thing, and then I come up with quote explanation unquote to serve the purposes of a book. And if somebody were to ask me, "Wow, Powers, you figure that's the real story?" I think no, it's not the real. I don't know what the real story is, but no, I picked a version that would facilitate a story. This isn't supposed to be real.
Well, given what you write and given that you're in California, I know you have to be familiar with Clark Ashton Smith.
I love Clark Ashton Smith.
I love Clark Ashton Smith as well. and one of my favorite short stories by him, I always get it wrong. It's called like The City of the Shining Lights or...
Oh, The Singing Flame?
I always get it wrong. Yes. Yeah.
City of the Singing Flame. Yeah.
So if you read that story and then think about what I just told you, it will blow your mind, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It will blow your mind because it's in California. It's in a granite field. But it's like a portal like explanation.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And he was, of course, very rural California. I mean, he was living in a cabin on a mountain somewhere near San Francisco.
Yeah, it begins with an A. Auburn.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually criminal. I actually went there this year, and there's a little plaque to him, but that's it. It's just kind of, it's like a footstone, and you barely notice it, and it's near this bridge, and that's it.
Who is it? I forget the publisher. Nightshade?
Might be.
Recently put out a 5-volume collection of all his stories.
Interesting.
I wrote an introduction to one volume. Yeah, him and, well, the big three of Weird Tales, him and Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard. I love them all. I could spend a year happily 6 months at least, happily reading nothing else.
Well, Robert E. Howard is the one who invokes like the reptilians, right? The shapeshifters.
That's true. Yeah,
right?
He always does have sort of reptilian creatures. Yeah.
Which has become a conspiracy theory now, like the David Icke sort of thing.
As a matter of fact, my most recent book, the one about the flying saucers, made use of a story the LA Times published on their front page in 1934, announcing that by means of ground penetrating radar, an engineer had found a series of tunnels under Los Angeles and somehow concluded that it must have been inhabited by a race of lizard men. I don't know how he went from the tunnels to it must have been lizard men.
This is one of these primordial stories that keeps coming over and over and over again. And I don't know why. I don't know anything about this, and I'm not saying I buy into any of this, but it's a primordial story that keeps getting repeated. And it's always about they're like shapeshifters, they're lizard men, they live underground.
Yep. LA Times published it as, news in 34.
In 1934?
1934. If you look up Google tunnels under Los Angeles lizard man, they have the actual reproduction of the newspaper page. It's things like that. I find these things and I think, Powers, you don't need imagination. You just need to dig deeply enough to find this stuff already documented.
Well, here's something even crazier. Now that we mentioned the word reptilians, at the bottom of this YouTube video, YouTube or Google will put a fact check and it will say something about the reptilians. It never does that for grays. It never does. But for reptilians, it always has this clarity. I'm just like, why? I'm not even saying they're real. I just mentioned them because they're just a ubiquitous primordial notion that's in the culture that appears over and over again. But why would you feel that? Why did you feel it's necessary to put that? I'm not saying it's, I don't know. It's very bizarre.
Yeah. Oh, the nice thing about dealing with all this stuff in fiction is I don't have to seriously consider it.
That's right.
I just think, oh, that's useful. I could have my characters get involved with that. I don't have to think, golly, Powers, maybe this is true.
There's so many different rabbit holes that you could go down. I'm content just to say, what did someone personally experience? What are the confounding factors that may not make it true? Right? Like with psychokinesis, right? Somebody says, I willed that door to close and it freaked me out because it closed. First question is, was there anyone around? Was there a breeze? And the answer, of course, is always no.
Can you do it again?
Yeah. And sometimes they can, but they don't know how they did it, right? Or they don't. There's plenty of stuff out there that's just fascinating. So in terms of writing about California, I come back to that. Why do you keep coming back to that? Well, you mentioned a little bit about with LA, there's just so much there, but what is it about California?
Well, I live here. I can go look at the places I'm writing about. And somebody said somewhere once that at some point the United States got tilted and all the loose things rolled down to California. California does seem to be from, Mount Shasta to Big Sur to Laguna to LA, a focus point, a gathering spot, low spots in the pavement where things puddle up. It's where you can count on, in almost any spot, weird stories. There's a highway up by Gaviota that apparently you're taking your life in your hands to drive through it, and not because of like dangerous road conditions, but just something kills you. And then there's Highway 1 by Big Sur where you're taking your life in your hands because the road is only about 10 feet wide with a terrible cliff on one side.
Well, it just collapsed about a year ago or so.
I'm lucky it wasn't.
And I was there about a year and a half ago, right?
Yeah. And of course, Big Sur, by definition, gathering place of all kind of weird beliefs.
Well, there's the Dark Watchers, right? That like Steinbeck mentioned in his one of his short stories.
That's right.
Could be infrasound, right? Which is the crash of the waves. It's a frequency your ears can't hear, but the amplitude of it certainly can assail your senses and cause paranoia. There's all sorts of crazy stuff associated with that.
And San Francisco, good Lord, as it was expanding.
It's a paradise if you need fentanyl and heroin.
Oh, right. I probably wouldn't try to find a occult explanation for that. But you remember in about the 1920s, they discovered that the city was expanding so fast that it was inconvenient that half of it was cemetery. And
I think there's like ancient Native American burial grounds underneath the Tenderloin, right? Or is there?
I didn't even get that. But
well, hold off on that because I wrote a short story that either used that or made that up. So just ignore that. Ignore that.
But they moved all the dead people, all the dead body graves to
Colma,
down
City of the Dead.
Yeah. And just everywhere you look in California, down the coast, there's stuff where you just think, well, I could build a story on that. Check that out. And we can go look at it. It's all within a driving range.
What advice would you give to new writers?
Well, there's all the old traditional advice, which is all solid rock true, which is read very widely, read outside of your field, read outside of your time. Don't restrict yourself simply to stuff published since 2000 or 1980 or whatever. You don't want to be chronocentric. Have as wide a base as you can, chronologically and subject matter. Read mysteries, read plays, read poetry, nonfiction, etc. That all stands. Write a lot. Set yourself a schedule and keep to it. Even if it's only 1,000 words a month, stick to it. Use guilt and fear as motivators. Tell yourself that you're worth nothing if you don't get the writing done, which probably often is.
That's very Catholic of you because that does work with me.
Well, probably true. Get it in front of editors. Send it out. Don't get trapped in a revision whirlpool. A story doesn't exist until an editor has looked at it. It's like Schrodinger's cat. Okay, all that's true. Then I would say, goes back to chronocentrism. Don't be a conformist. Don't try to clock what's selling now. Because even if you could correctly gauge that and then write a story, it's very likely not to be what's selling now by the time your story comes out. Don't be a conformist. Don't bend your writing to fit what you see as trends, even if they seem to be mandatory trends. They're not. If you say, oh, this is what they're buying now, this is what you have to do now in order to get published, there's some boxes you have to check. No, be different. Be a nonconformist. Because if you go along that conformist road, even if it gets published, your work is just going to be one more of that generic type. And what's the value in that? So I would say ignore trends. Don't try to clock what is selling now. What do they want now? What is the silhouette I have to shrink myself to fit? That way, your stuff will be distinct. There will be all of that stuff. And then on the other hand, there's your stuff, which even if everybody concludes, yes, there's that distinct stuff, which happens to be no good, you'll at least be writing the stuff that you naturally would write, the stuff that interests you, that organically grows up from your own individual perspective, your own tastes. I think it would be very sad to write a story expounding themes you didn't particularly actually subscribe to just because you felt you ought to. Even if it got published, it would not really be a story you could take a whole lot of satisfaction from. And if it got rejected, you'd feel like a real idiot. I didn't even write what I wanted to, and it got rejected.
And in the distant future, it probably won't be remembered because it wasn't distinct.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to approach a story with a deliberate, articulable theme this is my story about Christianity or racism or whatever your personal obsessions might be. I would say just write a story about characters you find interesting with problems that would validly concern them and resolutions that strike you as plausible. And you'll find that whatever your convictions are evident by accident.
Yeah, let your subconscious do your work.
Yeah.
Do the work of setting the theme. Don't let your conscious interfere. Because your subconscious is smarter than you are.
Yeah, I've sometimes reread books of mine and thought, look, you're making some kind of statement here. I had no idea of it at the time, and I'm not sure I agree with it, in fact. But, interesting. But I would never deliberately set out to make a statement.
Well, to that exact point, somebody just noted to me years after I did it, they're like, you keep writing about martyrs, like self-sacrifice. And I'm like, even my Writers of the Future story was about self-sacrifice at the very end. I'm like, I didn't even realize that. You don't even realize it. So thank you very much, my friend. I know you have to go. So thank you for spending time. And everybody should buy the books that I put in the description below because you're a fantastic author and have sold many books, some things to Hollywood, and you're somebody who should be listened to and read.
Damn right. Ha. All right. Well, thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.